All right, we're joined now, as promised, by Brittany Hughes, who's a host and commentator at MRCTV. Does a lot of great work there. You saw a little piece of a sample of her work earlier as we were promoting her being a guest on the show. Brittany, welcome.
Thanks so much, Randy. Glad to be here. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. And congratulations for the move back into the Eastern time zone.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, California, actually San Diego was a pretty nice area, I got to say, but won't miss the state in general. Let's just put it that way. We got out before the dreaded water tax, so I'm good.
Oh, there you go. In fact, we were just talking about in the sports section, or we're going to talk about in the sports section, I should say, Notre Dame and Navy. And I know a lot of people, the eyebrows kind of lift when they say Notre Dame and Navy are playing in San Diego, but San Diego's got a significant military presence, but especially a Navy presence.
Oh, my goodness, it's huge. We've got 3 or 4 different bases. We were a little closer to the coast, but absolutely beautiful place. I will say I won't miss the state. I will miss the weather. You cannot beat that weather. It was perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, the main reasons I wanted to talk to you was sort of the reactions we've seen in general to just a whole bevy of stories. It would be one thing to be talking about the midterms, where the reactions from both sides have been, I'm losing my mind over here, and no, I can lose my mind more over here. But then you add on to that the mail bombs story out of South Florida, as it turned out, and then that horrendous event in Pittsburgh in the synagogue and the killing of 11 people happens. And is there anything that can possibly happen from a news standpoint that doesn't immediately get spun in either direction, to the Republican side or the conservative side or the liberal side? I mean, it's pretty frustrating as just kind of an average American.
It very much is, and I think that this is, this is a really sad commentary on where we have devolved to in general, and a lot of it is fueled by the media. I mean, I was commenting last week, even before the tragedy over the weekend at the synagogue, which is just, horrific beyond description. But with the mail bomber or the, potential mail, but you can't call somebody a bomber if they didn't actually blow something up. So we'll call him the attempted mail bomber or whatever. And I was actually commenting to my husband. I was like, CNN hasn't talked about anything but this. It's like there's nothing going on in the entire world other than this. And so I think a lot of what you see, a lot of the reaction, a lot of the spin is fueled by the media and fueled by social media, people's ability to react to things before they even get information. And I think that it's not indicative of the average American. I do think it's indicative of our current political climate, though, that it's, and I hesitate to say this because I don't think most people feel this way, or at least I hope they don't, but it seems like whenever there's a tragedy, both sides almost get excited that they might be able to blame the other side for it.
Yep.
And they wait for information to come out to figure out, okay, well, who was it and what was their political affiliation? And then as soon as it comes out, one side points at the other and goes, I got you. That's horrible.
Yeah.
That's an absolutely horrible way to look at things like this. And look, the media doesn't do us or themselves any favors. This is something that we study and we monitor very much at the Media Research Center. The angle that they tend to report stories, it's no longer just, hey, this happened, here's the news, think what you will of it. It's spin. So, of course, as soon as people started getting these packages in the mail, and before we even knew whether they were actual explosive devices, who had sent them, no information was known except, hey, some padded envelopes came in the mail, something that kind of looked like a bomb was in it, we're investigating. That's all the information that had come out. And pundits were still rushing to blame Donald Trump for escalating political violence. Like the entire thing was completely and totally his fault, for perpetuating, violent rhetoric, or, their favorite phrase now is dog whistling to people, and completely ignoring the fact that you've got people on the left, i.e. Eric Holder, Maxine Waters, people on the left who have actually openly called for public harassment and violence. And so I think you see it on both sides. If you're looking for it, you can find it on both sides. But let's not pretend like, you know, like Donald Trump is just out there, you know, stirring up a whole bunch of rhetoric. That's what the left does every single day.
Yeah.
It's what the liberal media does every single day. You really think it helps to run around calling 63 million Trump voters Nazis? And you think that tones down rhetoric? You think that doesn't...
Hey, wait, Brittany, let me ask you, in reference to sort of the constant, well, this is hate speech, and this is hate speech, and this is hate speech, the rallies that President Trump has been doing for the midterms for candidates all over the country it'd be hard pressed to find a more triggering style of event for people that don't agree with him. The fact that they've got to see these things, and these things are out there, and his speeches are out there. How much of that is just as much of a triggering event as anything that comes that sets people that are of the more conservative ilk off?
Well, and I think it kind of, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but it does kind of depend on how you look at it. Look, I have never been, and I've long since said this, I have never been a fan of, you know, a lot of the things, not just a lot of the things that Trump says, but maybe more so the way that he says them, okay? His sort of Trumpian way of talking, which does tend to resonate with a lot of people, and I understand that. They like a president that, you know, says what they're thinking and doesn't sound all high and mighty and political, and I get that, I do, but there are times where, you know, a more presidential tone and being careful what you say would definitely be appreciated and called for. At the same time, there are many times, and we've seen this time and time and time again, where he says something, and that one, you know, 10, 15-second soundbite out of a 45-minute speech gets twisted and taken by the left, and they run with it in a totally different direction. For example, when he said over the weekend, you know, he pointed out that armed guards are often very effective at stopping terrorists and stopping people with guns getting in and murdering a whole bunch of people. That is true. We have seen that armed guards are effective at deterring and stopping these kinds of events. Well, of course, the Washington Post immediately runs with that as, oh, he's blaming Jews for attacks against their own communities. He's like Hitler. It's ridiculous. So you're going to find what you want to find if you're just going to, you know, grab little bits and pieces out of his speech and run with that. You know, when he said that, you know, he's a nationalist. Well, if you look at the definition of nationalism, it simply means that you promote the interests of your country over everybody else's. You're concerned about what's happening within your borders.
Not if you're reading out of a different dictionary.
Not if you're reading out of a different dictionary. But if you look back at history, Teddy Roosevelt used the word nationalism all the time. So, you know, it again, you're going to take it the way that you want to take it. And, you know, I think right now we no longer look at things as, okay, here's what somebody meant. We look at it as, okay, how can we use this as a political weapon to make our point and to demonize somebody? And I think that's what happens over and over again. People get stirred up, people get emotional, then something bad happens, and everybody freaks out irrationally before they even have information.
You know, I've got a question that's got nothing to do per se with politics or any of this, but I find myself just mad at times during the day that I can mitigate that by getting away from social media, by getting away from reading news stories, by just sort of escaping to a degree. Do you think I'm unusual in that, or is that a natural human reaction to the bombardment that we get, not only in social media, but in all forms of the media? Because it's not just liberal media. It's also conservative media is just as bad of pounding you between the eyes with stuff that just sort of torques you off.
Well, and that's why I always tell people that if you're looking for truth, unfortunately these days you don't have very many completely unbiased places to turn to. So I always say, you know, look at some left-wing sources, look at some right-wing sources. A lot of times the actual truth lies somewhere in the middle. At the same time, I think that what you're saying about getting away from everything is a perfectly normal reaction. I think that's where the majority of Americans live. Look, people like me who spend much of our lives, because of what I do for a living, spend much of our lives on Twitter, you know, listening to pundits on both sides. We tend to get, I think, an unrealistic picture and sometimes have to remind ourselves, look, the average American wakes up in the morning, eats their bowl of Wheaties, and goes to work. And they take care of their families, and they're worried about putting their kids through college and paying their mortgage. That's the vast majority of Americans. And I think they get sick of this. They get just so sick and tired of it. I spent the last 3 weeks pretty much away from work. Wrote a little bit, but we were in the middle of a cross-country move, which took a while.
Yeah.
And we drove across the country. We got in our car with a whole bunch of our stuff and made the drive across the country. And it's an absolutely, if you've never done it, by the way, I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful country from coast to coast. And you know what? I barely checked social media for a couple of weeks. And it was one of the most free feelings I think I have felt
yeah.
in a long time. It feels like a detox. It really, really does. It feels like a detox. And look, I believe in staying informed, particularly in an election year. I believe in knowing what's going on. It doesn't do you any good to bury your head in the sand and just not pay attention. But you have to do so in moderation. You can't allow it to make you angry at, your spouse, your neighbor, who you go to church with.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to become bitter against your fellow American, and I think that's something I'm seeing on both sides. People are, starting to itch for a fight rather than just accept that political fights happen. Now they want them. And I think it's starting to make us really bitter against one another. And that becomes very dangerous. So if you're finding yourself in that place, step away.
Yeah.
I
do.
Just go take a picnic or something. I don't know. Do something.
Well, that's one of the great things about being around sports. I can just be around sports and largely get away from a lot of that. Hey, we're getting ready in another week or so for these midterm elections. No matter which party you're either a part of or planning to vote for, or if you're, an independent or whatnot, can you just a few words on the importance of actually using that valuable tool which is voting?
Absolutely. I would say two things about it. First of all, and we've said time and time again, you've heard it said that voting is your civic duty. This is something that, people in other countries have fought and died for this right. Not everybody gets this. This is something that we take for granted because we're so used to it just being our right. And in many countries, that's not the way that it is. And even if they do have the right to vote, elections are so rigged that it doesn't even matter. Look down in Venezuela.
Right.
So, I always say that people should vote, but I add a caveat to that. Vote because you're informed, not simply because it's your right to do so. It's an important right, but it's also a very important responsibility to make sure that you're educated on issues and you know where you stand, instead of just voting for somebody because they've got a certain letter next to their name or because that's who's been in office in your district for the last 15 years or whatever. Make sure that you inform yourself from multiple sources and really, truly understand where somebody stands, then go vote. That really is how voting should be done in this country, is with an informed electorate. And that's something I think we need to start getting back to and emphasizing.
Those are some sage words of advice, Brittany. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to the Eastern Time Zone.
Thanks so much, Randy. Talk soon.
All righty. Bye-bye. All righty. Thank you so much to Brittany. Glad you joined us, and thank you for your time. Just a little something to think about, as always.